Russian troops continue to bomb Russians while blaming Ukraine. His legitimate Zelensky's status during martial law explained. The anniversary of Ukraine's joining to UNESCO. Good afternoon. All this in easy terms by Pavlo Stelmach in UATV weekly wrap-up for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. A multi-storied building in Russian Belgorod under attack by the Kremlin. No, I made no mistake here. And here, some wise in easy terms, or better, reasons. The first reason, we can clearly see that the explosion vector is upwards from the front doors of the building. No missiles fly that low. This house does not seem like one at a remote location on the outskirts, as there are also other houses behind it. So if this is not a remote location on the outskirts, then it is simply not in our Ukrainian fire coverage zone. Second, the power blast is nowhere even near of a 122mm shell, for example. Well, what is near of that? It is near the FAB glide bomb 500, which had already previously fallen on the heads of the residents of Belgorod region from their own Russian Su-34 fighter jets. The only difference is that the destructive consequences were not that obvious like this time. Reason number 3. When playing back this wide on a slow or even super slow motion, we see no signs of a missile at all. I mean, no diagonal flight path of any flying object. So what we must conclude looking at what we see is that it must have been a vertical free fall of a bomb, for example. Highly likely it is exactly the case here, especially now when the Russian occupation forces in the border areas of the Kharkiv region are imitating an epic offensive. The intensity of the use of glide bombs is very high. Reason number 4. Putin already had the experience of blowing up high-rise buildings to justify his wars. Kashir Highway in Moscow and Volgodonsk in 1999, agents of FSB who brought explosives into the basement of one of the houses under the guise of Ryazan sugar. All this was to justify the Chechen war, and now they will justify war against Ukraine. By the way, according to opinion polls in Russia, Ukrainians are to blame for the attack on the Crocus City Hall, although the Islamic State took responsibility for that. Their performers were citizens of Tajikistan. Ostankina, Russian TV, said that Ukrainians are to blame, which means that Ukrainians are to blame in the minds of Russians. Now, the Ukrainians are also to blame here. The propagandists say that the attack was from Vovchansk, where the Russians are now trying to advance. But the problem is that the city is on the southeast and the missiles fly from the northeast. For the Russians it is not a problem. They once told at the Zaporizhzhia NPP that a rocket changed its trajectory by 180 degrees before falling, and it is much easier to turn by 90 degrees. You see, there are never enough reasons I could be providing on the matter. There is always someone who will say, "No way, Ukraine, this is you. This is your Ukrainian revenge." Well, the Kremlin will say exactly so to justify the upcoming assault in Kharkiv, for example. You see, whatever upcoming military crime they are going to justify, they always justify it with even more military crime in the past. Please let me deliver one main unbeatable reason why Ukraine did not do this. It is absolutely and unconditionally pointless act of terror that not only not favors Ukraine in any military sense, but compromises the international military assistance. Why would we ever do that when our army is fighting while resources are scarce? Like we shoot down our own leg to do exactly what? To murder civilians in small Russian city of Belgorod? Then what? Give me one solid reason for Ukraine to do it. But before you even try to answer a question first. Why Ukraine never did that before, if this is us, and this is who we are? Civilian population murderers? Well, of course, the residents of Russia in general and the city of Belgorod in particular, and the residents of the Kremlin especially, will blame us Ukrainians of what happened in Belgorod. We are not surprised. Those Russians say that Putin dies tomorrow, they are going to get themselves another replaced dictator and ask him to continue this brutal blood criminal Russian war of aggression. So much from Russia with love, right? Laws say, President, stay. Believe it or not, It never was, is, or even will be about Volodymyr Zelensky. It is about the fact that Ukraine will abide by its law and not any other law, the Constitution of Ukraine. Which, by the way, no one amended as per their own comfort. Namely, since Article 108 of the Constitution of Ukraine states the powers of the President of Ukraine are terminated early in the event of resignation, inability to perform their duties due to health concerns, removal from office by impeachment, death. So it is a letter of the Ukrainian law in the first place. Secondly, it is the spirit of it. No one can ensure a fair ballot during the war, and we in Ukraine want fair ballot only. And thirdly, the whole world accepts the previous three reasons, but Russia, of course, whose usurped Tsar's crown is burning. The European Parliament refused to recognize Putin as a legitimate president. In the text of the adopted resolution, the elections are called a farce, and in the words about Putin, they deliberately do not use the term president.
Important thing is the inauguration of Putin. After a lot of discussion with member states, I sent a message to all of them saying that, from my understanding, the right thing to do is not to attend this inauguration. My advice was not to do it, and I think that most of the member states will not attend. I think it is the right thing to do. At the end, Putin is someone convicted by an international criminal court. At the beginning was a discussion about member states, we have to attend, not to attend, at which level, ambassadors, chargés d'affaires. But for me, the position was clear. It was going to be very difficult for the Ukrainians and for many people around the world to understand that we consider Putin someone convicted by the International Criminal Court, responsible for the war in Ukraine, the elections that we contest because they were not free, neither fair elections, and then to attend the inauguration, it would be a clear contradiction. So my advice to the member states was not to attend, and I hope that many of them, most of them, will follow this indication. But each member state is fully sovereign to decide to go or not to go.
And they will do everything that is in their usurped power to distract attention from their own burning crown. Back in February 2024, the Security Service of Ukraine released a public notice by the Presidential Intelligence Committee on new risks of Russia's hybrid war against Ukraine. Ukrainian intelligence exposes the Russian plan to overthrow the current government, that is, the very political leadership of the armed resistance to Russia. For this, Russia is about to stage a special operation called Maidan 3, the total budget of which should be up to $1.5 billion. According to intelligence data, the special operation will reach its climax in March and May 2024. So over the coming weeks, we will see the enemy will devote maximum efforts to disseminate false and destructive to global security narratives, as well as usual, attempts to fire up all possible conflicts, both within Ukraine and in other parts of the world, that there are countries where the effective support for Ukraine is present.
The campaign's methodology is traditional for Russian special services to question the legitimacy of government decisions made in Ukraine after May 20th, to spread panic and disbelief, to artificially oppose civilians and the military, to quarrel us with our allies, and to spread all kinds of conspiracy theories in society. Statement of the Intelligence Committee under the President of Ukraine.
A quick reminder, in November 2023, the leadership of the Verkhovna Rada and representatives of factions signed a memorandum on holding the next presidential and parliamentary elections no earlier than 6 months after the end of martial law. Since then, there is martial law in Ukraine, and all ballots during this period are prohibited by Article 19 of the law on the legal regime of martial law. And just this week, deputies of the Verkhovna Rada unanimously extended martial law for 3 months. So, in easy terms, this means that President Zelensky stays as legitimate president after May 20, 2024, and right until the martial law is lifted, because Ukraine says so, as simple as that. And all attempts to discredit the will of Ukrainian nation and the law is nothing but complicity with Russian aggression. Did you notice that the issue of elections in Ukraine is not an issue either for Ukraine or its global international allies? It is an issue, and quite an acute one, surprisingly only for Russia. Why, in easy terms, the current Russian government knows perfectly that it is illegitimate in its core and is simply going all in. What else can it do? What they call in the Kremlin ballot of the president in 2018 and those that will be happening in March 2024 were and will be held taking into account illegal forced ballots in Ukraine, that is, in the Russian-occupied Crimea and other territories of our country. All this is literally dancing on the graves, and not only does it not have no legal basis, it is obviously criminal, alright? But maybe we wanna look into Russia itself. What about the law and order there? Massive falsifications, persecution, and shamelessly open murder of political opponents. There are simply no such norms and laws left on the face of legal earth according to which the current Kremlin government could be considered legitimate, either outside or even inside of the country. Therefore, the main task of the Kremlin is to distract attention and demoralize Ukrainians, suppressing our resistance if they can. This could not be done earlier, either on the battlefield or by terrorizing the civilian population. The Ukrainians survived the battle and did not freeze in our cities during the terrible winters of 2023 and 2022. The Kremlin bet on fatigue of Ukrainian resistance did not play out too well either. The Russians managed to delay making vital decisions, though, but European allies eventually came together and showed character and clear intentions to support Ukraine until its victory. But here is the truth in even easier terms. This victory means it all for Ukraine, literally all of it. It will change our lives for the better and for good. And for Russia it will mean right the opposite. But you know what? Don't trust me, just watch. 70 years ago, on May 12, 1954, Ukraine became a member of UNESCO, an international organization that works within the UN and takes care of issues of interstate cooperation in the fields of culture, science, education, development of monuments and their protection. Currently, in the conditions of full-scale Russian aggression against Ukraine and the illegal occupation of the Crimean Peninsula by the Russian Federation, one of the priorities of Ukraine at UNESCO is to ensure effective monitoring by the organization of the situation in Crimea. In 2023, 25 objects of cultural heritage of Ukraine were given enhanced protection within the framework of the 1954 Hague Convention on the Protection of Cultural Property in the events of armed conflict. Thus, additional international mechanisms for the protection of cultural heritage objects of Ukraine have been created. The international responsibility of Russia for crimes committed against the cultural heritage of Ukraine has been strengthened. Objects have strong international legal immunity from attacks by an aggressor. Attacks on the specified objects will be considered as a war crime in the sense of international criminal justice too. Created legal grounds for bringing Russia to international responsibility for aggression against our state. Ukraine will need nearly $9 billion over the next decade to rebuild its cultural sites and tourism industry after a full-scale Russian invasion. This assessment was made in February by UNESCO itself. According to the organization, the country's interconnected cultural and tourism sectors lost more than $19 billion in revenue during the full-scale war. The hostilities damaged 341 cultural objects throughout the territory of Ukraine.
The Kharkiv region was by far the worst affected, accounting for almost 25% of the damage recorded, followed by Donetsk region at 14.7% and the Odessa region at 7.6%. Since February 2022, the culture and tourism sectors have also accumulated lost revenues of $19.6 billion, representing an increase in 30% in 1 year. More than half of this lost $10.6 billion has been occurred by the city of Kyiv alone, mainly due to the fall in tourist numbers and the sudden slowdown of the creative industries. From the press release of UNESCO.
This statement was made in February. Of course, nowadays the amount of damage in the Kharkiv region and Kharkiv itself is much greater, as in Odessa, on which the Russians hit every week with their missiles, calling the city Russian and destroying it. By the way, its center is included in the list of UNESCO monuments, but who cares about the cultural heritage of mankind when there is a cannibalistic heritage? UNESCO states that deliberate destruction of cultural heritage sites, including religious buildings and artifacts, can amount to a war crime. The organization previously condemned the Russian attack on Odessa, which hit several cultural sites in the city on July 23, 2023. As of January 25, 2024, the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine recorded more than 1.9 thousand objects of cultural infrastructure that were damaged or completely destroyed by Russia's full-scale aggression against us. Of course, our cooperation with UNESCO is increasing. The organization and donor countries will increase assistance to Ukraine. They will also pay special attention to the support of Ukrainian science. This was announced at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris during a meeting of the leadership of the organization Secretariat with the delegations of member states on emergency aid to Ukraine in March. UNESCO also plans to monitor and implement long-term projects to overcome the environmental consequences of the destruction of Kakhovka HPP dam by the Russians. As of March this year, UNESCO has mobilized more than $66 million to help Ukraine. It's time for more on UATV English. You ask her questions, we answer them in easy terms. The question of this week has been voiced by our viewer Elegant, and the question sounded like, would Russian sabotage across the European continent be seen as acts of war on NATO countries? Well, both yes and no. It depends on who you are addressing your question to. To me, yes, surely it should be, and the answer should be as swift, asymmetrical, and devastating as it gets, both militarily and politically. Because we in Ukraine know what is going to happen if you let a burglar and a murderer to go unpunished. Now address this same very question to some of those high-profile politicians who wanted the same very burglar and murderer at the negotiation table, even presiding over the UN Security Council. Then we all should have had a nice under-the-table and on-the-table discussion about how far and how violent Russians can go in terms of breaching laws, borders, and sovereignty of countries. Russians would much appreciate an international discussion on what exactly should be considered a Russian sabotage, like those Russian missiles and drones that fell in Poland or Romania, for example. Is that already an act of war or just a sad mistake, and Russia should not be rebuked too harshly for the sake of non-escalation? You know we in Ukraine also are very much for the non-escalation. The real one, though. What we don't want is when, for the sake of the hypothetical non-escalation, Russia is allowed to do terrible, inhuman sins, and the world observes. It expresses a deep concern often, and then Russia lies again and again, and the world steps back again, and just reassigning that act of war escalation mark it higher, given Russian imperial brutality more space and time to do its bloody deed, destruct and sabotage, because they know that their act of war market would be slided up again when they again lie and escalate. It is good to see the world is awakening right now. Slowly, but it does. The world helps itself by helping us defeat a monstrous paradigm of lies and brutal blatant murder that already has no disguise. Ukraine made sure of that. All those who have eyes see what Russia is and understand that sabotage will continue. So in easy terms, here it is no one knows the definitive answer. Will Russian sabotage in Europe be considered an act of war or not? All I can tell you is it is an act of aggression already, whatever the reaction of the world might be. Here is what Europe and the civilized West should understand as soon as possible. It is at war with Russia right now. And all those fears of escalation from proxy level to direct armed conflict level can also be put an end right now. Help Ukraine win and enjoy the consequences rather than regret it has not been done in time, thus letting Russia escalate the situation endlessly. That's it, folks, for this episode, for example. If you like us in return, then subscribe. If you trust us, and share. If you want Ukrainian voice to be heard worldwide, your support and opinion is what really matters. I'm saying goodbye. However, more to come already next week with my dear colleagues Henry Keane on UATV English directly from Ukraine. Stay tuned and see you soon.